Hi everyone, we're from the Full Abilities Project. My name is Ola and I'm here with Benedict. Today we have the pleasure to interview Jess, an Australian vlogger, writer, and disability advocate.
So, how has living with a disability affected your life?
So I would say that my disabilities have affected my life to different varying degrees at different points in my life. I've always found sports and physical activities quite challenging, and I found it quite difficult to keep up with my peers in that regard. But earlier on in my life, I was still able to live my life more normally, for lack of a better word. About 4 years ago, my condition deteriorated quite significantly. And that's when I started to have to push a lot harder for an answer as to what was wrong with my body. And about 2 years ago, I took up the use of mobility aids and I decided to start restructuring my life around my disability rather than trying to force my body to live a lifestyle that was designed for somebody else and that was causing me a lot of unnecessary pain and fatigue.
Okay, have you noticed any difference between how Australians treat disability and how Belgians do?
So that's a little bit of a difficult question to answer because the way that I lived my life in Australia is very different to how I live now in Belgium. But there are definitely a couple of things that I can remark on. So in Australia, I actually found it really difficult to be undiagnosed. I felt like I was met with a lot of suspicion and disbelief when talking to doctors or even like the general public when I expressed that I had long-term symptoms or difficulty doing certain activities. And I feel like definitely when it came to like friends and family and the general public, a lot of people were really threatened by the idea that you could have a long-term health condition and that doctors wouldn't necessarily be able to help and understand what was going on straight away, because that's so at odds to how chronic conditions and disability are portrayed in the media. But on the other hand, I feel like my Belgian friends have a much better understanding of the fact that getting a diagnosis and a good, effective, personalized treatment program for a complex illness is very time consuming. And I've felt a lot more accepted, which has been really nice. I felt like, if anything, they've leaned a lot more towards, appreciating the strength it's taken to get through the last couple of years rather than treating me with suspicion or treating physical illness like it's some kind of moral judgment on who I am as a person. They realize that it's something that's very much outside of my control. I'll also say from a practical perspective, I do get much more financial intervention from the Belgian healthcare system as opposed to Australia. That is obviously partially the fact that I now have a clear diagnosis, but the process for getting diagnosed has been a bit easier here, and being recognized as being chronically ill has been a lot easier. Whereas in Australia, unfortunately, it can be quite a degrading process.
Do you think people are getting more knowledgeable about chronic illness?
I think this is a really interesting question because I think we're all really influenced by the social bubbles that we move in. So I know for myself, I'm either surrounded by people who know me and my story really well personally, or my online chronic illness community, where most people are living with a condition or a disability themselves. So of course, they're all really knowledgeable about it, but I don't know if that always translates to the general public. I have had some friends and acquaintances talk to me since I started blogging about how they've learned a lot from some of my articles, and they didn't really realize how much chronic conditions could affect people's lives on a day-to-day basis. And so I do like to think that individual advocates like me are starting to make a difference, but I do think more needs to be done on an institutional level, like in schools, universities, hospitals, that kind of thing.
Okay, now we have more of a personal question. So if you don't mind telling us, have your chronic illnesses affected your relationships in any way?
Definitely. Yeah. I think when I was younger, living with chronic illnesses, especially undiagnosed chronic illnesses, really limited my ability to form meaningful relationships with people. And I wouldn't say that I had a lot of friends when I was younger, to be quite honest with you. I think now that I'm a little older and when I was in my early 20s, I started to form better relationships, but they were still quite superficial. So I felt like I was very guarded with people. Like I felt like I had a dirty little secret that I didn't want people to find out. And now some of those people have left my side over the last couple of years, which has been really difficult. But the ones who have stuck around, I feel like I've really been able to deepen my connection with them because I have a better understanding of myself and a better relationship with myself. And so they, of course, can understand me better too. And I'm really happy in all of those relationships. I would actually say, like, if anything, now I feel like chronic illness is more of an advantage when it comes to forming new relationships, because every single human being has baggage, and mine is a lot more outwardly on display than some people's is, because not only because I use crutches, but because I write about all the hairy details of my life online. And if somebody finds that too threatening, they're either not going to have contact with me in the first place, or they're going to reveal very early on in a relationship how they deal with conflict and discomfort. And so it saves me a lot of time and energy. It makes it easy to, separate the wheat from the chaff, as it were, with who I want to spend my time and energy on.
And do you mind when people are curious and ask about your illness?
Do I mind if people are curious about my chronic illness? Yeah, so I think the key thing for me is the fact that you use the word curious. Because for me, it's like the intention and the manner in which the question is asked that makes all the difference. Like if somebody is genuinely curious and they're asking questions in an appropriate and sensitive way, I have no problem answering them at all. And, if anything, I would rather people ask questions rather than make assumptions. But I do frequently find myself faced with like some pretty presumptuous questions, like, what happened to you? Were you in an accident? When are you going to get better? Questions that mean that the person, it's pretty much always somebody who doesn't know me at all. I actually get stopped on the street semi-regularly to get asked questions like that. And that person's making a huge assumption about me when they don't know anything about me. And I think if you want to know more about chronic illness, or you want to know more about a specific person's chronic illness, that needs to be done in a calm environment where you can actually have a proper conversation. You can't just expect somebody to distill their whole life story down into one nice little easily digestible sentence for you.
How much time do you spend daily on rehabilitation or treatment?
So this actually tends to shock a lot of people because it's quite a lot of time. Even though I do obviously identify as a writer and a disability advocate, I would still say that my main occupation at the moment is my recovery. So I always start my day with my jaw exercises, which is to help with the hypermobility of my TMJ joint, which is the area that connects like the jaw to the ear, just there. And I also do some mobilization exercises to warm up my body and make sure I don't dislocate any joints during the day while I'm going about my activities. I don't have actual appointments every day, but I do have physiotherapy appointments about 3 times a week. And I also see a pain psychologist, and I have doctor's appointments regularly too, because there are still aspects of my treatment that I'm still figuring out. I also exercise a lot at home to strengthen my muscles and stabilize my joints. A lot of people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, as you would probably know from Hannah, have a lot of difficulty maintaining muscle tone. But ironically, it's really, really important for stopping the pain, or at least reducing the pain and joint dislocations. I also have to follow a special allergy-free and low histamine diet. And that takes a lot of time as well, because I have to take a lot of care when I eat, and when I go grocery shopping, I have to be really careful about what I'm buying and plan out everything in advance to make sure that I'm getting decent nutrition without making myself sicker. I think those kinds of little extra things are often things that are overlooked in terms of like the big time and energy drain they can have on people with chronic conditions. So that's why I wanted to include that as well.
And What is something you're hoping to achieve by sharing your story on social media?
So when I first started Delicate Little Petal, both the website and the Instagram page, there were two things that I really wanted to bring awareness to. So the first one was that illness almost always begins before diagnosis, and the experience of chronic illness or disability is equally valid, even if it hasn't been officially recognized by our often imperfect medical system. I feel like so much unnecessary harm is done through the way that we treat people who aren't diagnosed. I do have a lot of firsthand experience of that, unfortunately. And I think it's really important to make not only able-bodied people aware of that, but also medical professionals. And unfortunately, sometimes also making people who are already in the disability community aware of the fact that they may still have internalized ableism. The second thing is that there are unique challenges that come with managing multiple comorbidities. So in my case, my primary diagnosis is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but that often comes with a lot of comorbidities. And I do deal with a couple of other health conditions too. And, you know, the challenges that I face and many others in this situation face, they may be different to somebody who is dealing with one very severe, potentially very life-threatening condition, but they can be just as life-altering on a day-to-day basis in terms of how they impact how you have to live your life and how you see yourself and value yourself. So I really wanted to provide a role model for people with chronic illnesses, especially younger people with multiple chronic illnesses, who felt that they couldn't really fit that mold of like disabled inspiration, because the disabled experience is so complex. And while we do need to be proud of what we can achieve and what we sometimes are forced to achieve, you know, in spite of the extra challenges we face, there's so much more to us than our productivity, and we shouldn't have to prove ourselves as exceptional to justify our existence. I know for myself, I used to be an aspiring musician, and I used to look up to examples of classical musicians who lived with long-term illnesses or serious health scares, who didn't let it stop them. And it really caused me a lot of distress at times that I couldn't live up to that example that they'd set of, you know, never ever letting an illness get in the way of a career progression. But now I've realized that I'm dealing with very different challenges to those people. And even people who have the same condition can be impacted in very different ways. So it's just not useful to compare ourselves to each other. And that's why we desperately need more diverse disability representation.
Thank you for that. Have you ever noticed that other people's behavior changes when they are around you? If so, why do you think that is?
You know, I think that really depends on the type of person and how well they know me. So my close family and friends who know me really well, and know that my disability doesn't change the core of who I am as a person, I don't think they act differently around me. I would say, like, out and about on the street, I am treated differently though, especially now that I am visibly disabled and using mobility aids and joint braces. I feel like people do stare at me on the street a lot more, because I think it's still not very common to see younger people using mobility aids. I know a lot of people don't like that. I personally don't mind it that much, because I feel like just by going outside and living my life, I'm already helping to increase representation by showing people that younger people can suffer from disabilities too, and they can benefit from mobility aids. I think that the flip side of that is that sometimes people do treat me with more kindness. I get offered seats a lot more. People open doors for me a lot more, which is obviously really appreciated. But I do wish that we could, as a society, realize like a lot of people are fighting invisible battles too, and we should be treating each other with that level of kindness regardless.
Thank you very much for the answer. And do you prefer when people acknowledge your chronic illness, or when they try to act as if it doesn't exist?
I would say from an emotional perspective, I spent so long trying to ignore or bury that part of my identity, and unfortunately also being gaslit by doctors, that it's actually a huge relief to me when people acknowledge it and accept it as part of who I am. And from a practical perspective, I know some people think that we should all be treated as equal no matter what, and we should be working towards a complete meritocracy. But in my opinion, we weren't all born equal, unfortunately, whether that's due to our health, our socioeconomic background, our education. I don't want someone to look at me and say, oh, she has a disability, she can't do this or that, or she's going to definitely need this accommodation. But acknowledging that somebody has a disability doesn't have to mean making a set of outdated assumptions about them. The more that we try to stay blind to the things that are making us different, the harder it is when making it for ourselves to actually learn about the reality of our differences and how we can actually break through these assumptions and stereotypes and end these stigmas and make the world a fairer and more inclusive place for everybody. We all have different skills and needs. And I do think it would be better if we started finding ways to make sure everyone can be involved in different aspects of life as possible. I think that it's a pretty lofty statement to make, but I would love it if, as a society as a whole, we could stop seeing, an able-bodied person as like the default human being around which all societal standards and expectations and accommodations are based, because there are a lot of different people who are not like that for all different types of reasons, and we're not that much of a minority in the world.
Yeah, I agree with you here. Yeah. And next question, it's a bit sciencey and looking into the future. Like, do you think science will advance enough so that people with genetic and chronic illnesses will be able to function normally or be cured completely? And if so, what can we as a society do to help scientists make that happen?
So I really liked this question because it really made me think, and also made me confront some things that I'm not doing that maybe I should be doing more of. I really don't know if genetic conditions like EDS will ever be curable, because since they are due to a genetic mutation, I don't know how we could stop our bodies from producing abnormally structured collagen. I don't know if one day maybe there will be a way to turn off certain genes before a child is born, but I do think that can pretty quickly bring us into the murky waters of things like gene editing and designer babies, and that obviously brings a huge amount of ethical issues with it. But I think regardless of how you feel about all of that, I definitely think it will be possible for us to have more effective personalized treatment programs available. At the moment, a lot of rare and genetic conditions such as EDS don't actually have official approved treatments in a lot of countries, and we're left to make our own decisions and do our own research about things, which is a little ridiculous. And I think the main barrier between us and better treatment is almost always funding. And the sad reality is we're either going to be dependent on government funding or pharmaceutical company funding. So I think that governments really need to know the huge impact that these conditions are having on people, how it limits our ability to contribute to society in ways that they care about, such as spending and working, and how much our care is costing them. And pharmaceutical companies need to know how common these conditions actually are and the huge opportunity it creates for them to work on treatments for us, as dystopian as that might sound. So what can we as individuals do about this? First of all, I think where possible, people who are affected by these illnesses really need to push for a specific diagnosis. So many people are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed for such a long time that we don't even really have a clear idea of how common some of these illnesses are. And we also need to spread awareness. So we need to let our family, friends, and doctors know about our conditions and how it affects us, regardless of whether we're diagnosed or not yet. And we need to move away from the idea that these genetic illnesses in particular are super rare and never worth looking into, because it's honestly horrified me the amount of times that people have got in touch with me through Instagram or my website to tell me stories about how their doctors told them that EDS is just so rare and there's absolutely no way they could possibly have it, when in reality, a few years later, they've turned out to be a textbook case with all the signs and symptoms. And I think once we have a diagnosis, we need to use all the resources available to us to their absolute fullest. And I know these can be hard to find and they aren't always exactly like advertised to us. So I think that contact with good doctors and sometimes nonprofit and also governmental organizations might be required. And I think if there aren't many resources at your disposal, consider contacting your local health minister and health department, and maybe also local not-for-profits, and explain to them why that's a problem. And if you have a good relationship with your doctor, you might ask them to do the same thing. It's all about making it really clear that there actually is a demand for more support for people with these conditions. And on a similar line of thinking, if you have found a specific treatment or medication that helps you that's not covered by insurance, or it's not a registered treatment for your specific condition, write to your health department or the manufacturer of that product and let them know why it's a problem, so that these bodies can actually become more aware of what we want to spend our money on. And I think the final thing is keep your eyes open for surveys and trials associated with your specific condition. So in my case, following groups like the Ehlers-Danlos Society has really helped me become connected with those opportunities. And I'm sure that there are similar groups if you do a little bit of research online for other conditions too.
Thank you very much. And one of the most important lessons you've learned since the beginning of your medical journey?
I would say that the most important thing that I have learned is how to gradually reestablish a connection between my mind and body, and eventually get back to trusting my own instincts. My body, for example, knows when a flare is coming and when to rest, and I've had to learn to listen to it in that regard. And it's also helped me figure out which foods are helpful or a hindrance to my well-being. And I've had to learn to listen to that too. That kind of thing can be really difficult at first. I think all of us, not just people with chronic conditions, are constantly bombarded with information about what is and isn't good for us. And sometimes it's contradictory. And we're also encouraged to push ourselves a lot and compare ourselves to others a lot. And we've lost the ability to connect to what our individual bodies want and need. But in time, that's gotten easier for me. And it's helped me to rebuild trust with myself. And rebuilding that trust is what's allowed me to start trusting my instincts again. So, for example, if I feel like I'm not being treated well by a doctor, previously I would have stayed, but now I'll just walk away. I won't assume that the problem is with me. I trust that I know myself and my body. And if they don't want to listen to what I have to say, I'll find somebody else who will. And similarly, if a physical therapist wants me to do something that is going to be harmful to me, I'm going to say no, because my body knows the difference between the mild discomfort of pushing my fitness limits and the serious discomfort of an oncoming joint dislocation or injury.
Okay, thank you. And we're actually almost at the end. I just have one last question. Is there anything else you'd like to say about living with a chronic illness that we haven't covered yet?
I think your questions have been really comprehensive and it's prompted a lot of really important discussions. So I thank you guys for that. I don't have much to add. I would love to reiterate what I said before, that illness begins before diagnosis, and we have to stop treating people as less than. If they're not diagnosed yet, we have to lift each other up and help each other, because so much unnecessary pain and trauma is caused by downplaying people's symptoms or by trying to force them to live in a way that doesn't suit the body that they were born with. And, this is actually an even more common problem among younger patients, younger female patients, and of course, patients who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And that's a big part of why I was really happy to be interviewed by you two today, because I love seeing, this fresh new initiative from really excellent young role models. And the fact that you're showing other younger people that disabilities can affect us too. And even though it can be a really hard road for us to walk, we can live really full and great lives with the right support and treatment.
Okay, thank you so much for the interview. It was a pleasure to meet you. And we hope you enjoy yourself as much as we did. So yeah, thank you very much again. And we hope to see you in the future. Maybe another interview.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for taking the time to give me such an in-depth interview. Will you indulge me in like 20 seconds of quick, cheeky self-promotion?
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So please follow me on Instagram at Delicate Little Petal, or visit my website, delicatelittlepetal.com. All the resources on there are free, and I post regularly about all aspects of life with physical and mental disabilities, but my main focuses are breaking social stigmas, the normalization of mobility aids, greater awareness about invisible illnesses, especially among young women, and of course, the fact that illness begins before diagnosis.